Hi, my name is Nicholas Collins, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about a construction project I got involved with that was sited on my parents' property. My parents decided that they wanted to build a small apartment house for my grandmother to live in. She wanted to come live with them because she's getting older and is blind. Unfortunately, that meant tearing down the garage to make room for the apartment house. Seeing the garage go was kind of like saying goodbye to an old friend. So, I decided that I would do what I could to preserve the structure, or rather the essence of the structure, by taking recycled materials from the old garage and using them to build a storage shed on the other side of the lot. This way, everybody wins. The space is made for the new apartment house, and we've got a place to store things since we don't have a garage anymore. Early on in the process, I christened the shed the Horage, which is short for an homage to the garage. I want to emphasize the fact that I am not a professional architect nor builder, and that this is a project that I undertook entirely naive of what it takes to do things like this. But that was part of the challenge, too. The garage was never actually used for car storage, at least not in my lifetime. Reason being, it was built in the 30s, back when cars were a lot narrower, and our cars would never really fit in it. But we did use it to store just about everything else: the lawnmower, garden tools, sporting equipment, camping equipment, everything you can think of practically. And the first step was cleaning out the garage and taking out all this stuff, some of which we hadn't seen in decades. It was quite a task. So taking down the garage was not easy, but it was certainly easy in comparison to what it took to build the shed. The garage was taken down in under a week, and the shed took 15 months to build. The garage had a lot of character to it, and I wanted to preserve that and bring that same aged quality to the shed. In taking down the garage, you had to be careful because all the wood was so old. We were able to use these tools, sort of crowbars called wonder bars, that worked very well. And sometimes just an old-fashioned hammer would do the trick. We decided that the best way to go about deconstructing the garage was taking the roof off first, then the rafters, then continue on down with the structure of the garage. This required a team of roofers because my mom wouldn't let me get up on the roof and risk falling off and breaking my neck, which was probably a good idea since I didn't know what I was doing anyway. We were fortunate enough to have a family friend who was a roofer, and so he led a team of a couple of guys. Along with our help, everybody kind of pitched in, tearing down the structure piece by piece. They got us probably about halfway through it. The rest of it took another week, just working in the afternoons and evenings, friends and family. In tearing down the garage, we learned that it was very well built, and we also learned how a structure like that is put together. In fact, some of the studs, particularly around the window framing, I kept intact and reused in place for the shed. So once we had taken down the garage, bit by bit, piece by piece, we saw how the piles of lumber that we were storing to use for the shed were slowly building up. And it is just incredible the amount of wood that it takes to build even a smaller structure like that. We had piles of lumber all over the yard and the side porch. We stored some of it under tarps. Some of it got a little bit moldy, but we were able to clean it up. It was a challenge to figure out where to put all this when we were building the shed. The shed is designed to be a condensed version of the garage. It's got the same square structure, the same pyramid-shaped hip roof, and it's really designed to capture the essence of what the garage was inside and out. But there's one major difference between the two structures, and that's that the garage had a slab foundation, and I chose to use a pier and beam foundation for the shed. Although the shed is made up of about 80% recycled materials from the old garage, one of the parts that isn't is the foundation. I chose to use new pressure-treated lumber to make sure it would be very solid and sturdy in case we ever wanted to move it someday, which is the ultimate reuse in a way. And also I wanted to make sure it would stand the test of time. In retrospect, the framing went fairly quickly, but I did have a little bit of trial and error in deciding exactly how the stud should be spaced, putting up the stud plan. I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted the windows at first either. But eventually it all fell into place, and I found a good structure. I chose to have studs 1 foot on center, so it's a very strong structure. I've added a lot of hurricane ties and straps, which reinforces it even more. Part of the reason for that is because I really care about it, and it's so old. It's this reincarnated garage. I want to make sure it's not going to go anywhere when a hurricane hits. Building a hip roof is not easy, and fortunately I had a good guide to go by looking at the structure of the old garage. The hip rafters, those are the ones that come out to the corners, were actually the exact same rafters and the exact same orientation as they were in the garage. Of course I had to cut them down just a little bit so they would fit. So that's a true homage there. In adding the hurricane ties, I noticed the difference in the widths of older lumber versus newer lumber. The older lumber is actually a little bit thicker, which meant I had to work a little bit harder to get brackets and ties to fit appropriately. There was a ladder in the old garage that led up to a storage space, and it just looked so cool. I was insistent on reusing it. It's got an older style spring mechanism that you really don't see much anymore, if at all. And I needed to find a way to fit the ladder in this shed. I drew out several different configurations for how the ladder might fit inside the shed. Some of them had the ladder fixed in place, others cutting the ladder off partially so I could allow it to retract up out of the way. And I eventually found a configuration that allowed for some rafter storage space, and the ladder could snugly fit in between two storage areas. Putting the siding on the shed was really exciting because I was able to finally see the feeling of the garage coming together as I placed each board. I tried to make certain paint splotches and designs match up. There's a very prominent CW, which is actually a puzzle piece together from 3 different pieces of siding. That was in the original garage, and I made a space for it. I wanted to make sure that if the shed were ever used for some other purpose in the future, that it would have a decent amount of energy efficient technologies. So I decided to put up radiant barrier plywood, which of course wasn't recycled, but in the end it makes a more energy efficient and cooler housing for the shed.